Well,
Yes, ma'am.
okay, thank you. So we were at discussing models of evaluation, and we discussed two models, Cairo model and Kirkpatrick model. And I mentioned that Kirkpatrick model is the most commonly used model, and yes, there have been authors who have uh, improved upon that model. And even Kirkpatrick's wife and son improved upon his own model, and later on, another model was adopted. And let us have a look at the model. Let me share my PowerPoint with you, and that would be easier then. So today we will be talking about another model that has been propounded by Jack J. Phillips. And Jack J. Phillips said that there is another extension to the Kirkpatrick model, and let's have a look at that. This is called the return on investment model. That is the Jack J. Phillips model, and by far, I think, most popular. But still, the popularity of Kirkpatrick model is still there, and in many economies, especially in Eastern world, Kirkpatrick is still being utilized. However, return on investment model is an improvement upon that. If you remember what was there in the Kirkpatrick model, we had four levels. Let's have a little recap of that. The four medals of Kirkpatrick were: first was level one, reaction. That is the basic level where the training course is completing, and it could be during the training course also. That measurement is done to what extent did the delegates react favorably to the training course. And to prove your training, you can even do a summative assessment, which is mostly either at the end of the unit or a learning event or at the end of the course. And it is more or less declaring whether the person is pass or fail, or giving grades and something like that. So that is up to the kind of training that you want to do. So reaction level one is the Kirkpatrick's first level. Then level two, learning. To what degree did the delegates acquire the intended knowledge? Of course, the place and the time could be same as the reaction level, but here the focus of evaluator is on the learning processes, and not just the reaction of the delegates. Again, here you can administer tests, and I think assessments become more important here when you are doing the level 2 evaluation, that is learning. So summative assessment and formative assessments, they both are more appropriate for assessing the learning of the participants. And focus again here is to see whether the learning is done optimum or not, how to improve the course, what environment should be there so that knowledge, skills, and attitude are best learned. So, to what degree did the delegates acquire the intended knowledge, skills, and attitude? That is what we try to measure here and assess here. Then, level three is the behavior, and sometimes people call it impact level also. That was an improvisation. And we try to see how much change in the behavior, that is knowledge, skills, and attitude, has happened, and did the delegates apply the learning to the job when they come back to the work. Then level 4 is the results level. To what degree did the targeted outcomes occur as a result of the training course and the subsequent work-based reinforcement of the training? And here at this level, the organization as a whole tries to assess how it is faring and whether the improvement, etc., is due to training or not. So, what results have been achieved? There has their balance sheet improved? Are the financial statements improved? whether the production has improved, whether the customer complaints have reduced, etc. So all these are indicators here, their annual reports, their financial statements, etc. Now let us move on to the next thing, the Phillips ROI model. Now, Jack Phillips published in his book Return on Investment in Training and Performance Improvement Programs, and that was an improvement or additional level to the Kirkpatrick model. He said there should be another level, and he called the next level, that is the fifth level, as the return on investment level, ROI level. That is why the model is called the ROI model, return on investment model. Now, what are the levels in the ROI model? You will notice that the first two levels are more or less the same as the Kirkpatrick's model. He also says that level 1 is the reaction level, evaluating the participants' reaction to the training they received. Now, how do we evaluate that? You can use short questionnaires, you can use surveys to collect data about what people thought about their training. And you can assess whether the conditions necessary for learning were in place. So that is how we go about it. Then level 2 is the learning level. That is the same as the Kirkpatrick. And here with the evaluator evaluates whether learning took place. Like, people may be saying that the training was very good, very useful and all, but that is just a reaction to the training. But has the learning improved actually or not? Again, you will put in the tests, assessments, formative, summative, etc. There are other kinds of assessments also that you can do. And this is exactly same as the Kirkpatrick model, and usually entails giving the participants multiple choice tests, quizzes, before and after the training or during the training also. Then we come to the level 3. Now here, there is a subtle difference. Jack J. Phillips says that, calls it application and implementation. In Kirkpatrick model, it was the behavior or the impact model, but here he calls it the application and implementation. Now, what he does in this level is he tries to segregate two things, application and implementation. Now, in this level, the evaluator determines whether the issue lay with the application of the learning or with its implementation. These two are different things. Like, whatever knowledge you gained or skills you acquired, are you applying it in the job performance, and has your job performance improved because of that application of the knowledge, or whether it is the implementation? So that is what it wants to. I will just explain the difference. Now, what is the difference? The difference is, level 3 of the Kirkpatrick model looks at the workplace behavior and assesses whether participants are using what they learned on the job. So whether we try to just measure that, assess that, we can use observation, we can use interviews, whatever. One of the main criticisms of the Kirkpatrick model has been that it doesn't gather enough data to help improve the training. We try to see it does not tell you whether the training has improved it or not. And it simply tells you whether the training was put into practice or not. Jack G. Phillips, he felt that this level should be improved. So he expanded it to cover both application and implementation. Now, this model, ROI model or the Jack J. Phillips model, it makes it far easier to see why training does or does not translate into workplace changes. If there is a problem, the ROI model helps you determine whether the issue lay with the application of the learning or with its implementation. It is a very small difference, subtle difference, but it is a crucial difference and can prove extremely helpful for organizations. They can actually segregate the factors that are different other than the training to see whether they are interfering with its application or not. Let's look at it with an example. Employees in a factory receive training to operate a new type of equipment. So it is a training of by demonstration or something. People were trained and they had to operate a new type of equipment. Now, if we are using the Phillips model, level 2, evaluation confirms that the training was successful. Learning happened and everything was okay. People could do a practical also in the training and show that they learned it. But the level 3 evaluation shows that the employees are not using their new skills and knowledge. A Kirkpatrick level 3 evaluation would simply tell you that the training wasn't being implemented. But a Phillips ROI model level 3 evaluation would show you more about where the problem lay. For instance, the employee could be able to operate the new machines, but they're faced with a problem that prevents them from implementing it. They're able to operate it, but there is some problem, maybe due to hardware or maybe due to any other factor which is not, may not be or may be connected with training, such as the machines being faulty or inoperable, or there may be some snag. So it clearly differentiates between the non-training interventions and training interventions. That is what the Jack J. Phillips model tries to differentiate in level 3. So let us move on now. Then Jack J. Phillips calls the level 4 as the impact. In this model, the level 4 is called the impact. And whereas the Kirkpatrick taxonomy, that is the nomenclature, focuses purely on results. He says results. But here he calls it the impact. The Phillips ROI model is much broader and looks at the impact of the training on the organization. How the organization is faring after the training. It is not necessary that only one training has happened and then you are doing the impact analysis. It could be a number of trainings. Actually, it should be a number of trainings. After that, you see the result on the performance of the organization as a whole. This helps identify whether factors other than training were responsible for delivering the outcomes. It could be possible that there was a government policy that changed and they introduced something easier for the organization. Or it could be that new imported software or something new was brought in the organization, which helped the employees to better their performance. So here again, differentiation between whether it is purely due to training or there are other factors that are responsible. These are identified. This represents a substantial improvement over the Kirkpatrick model, as it allows you to see whether factors such as sales data, weather, or supply issues, or the distribution system, or maybe the marketing strategy, etc., were responsible for changes in performance metrics. It could be also that due to government policy, there's more demand for the product. So the organization is performing much better. Now let us come over to level 5. That is the return on investment. He calls Jack J. Phillips calls the 5th level as return on investment, in short ROI. That is the level. Now, unlike the Kirkpatrick taxonomy that simply measures training results against stakeholder expectations, like this is return on expectation kind of thing, the Phillips ROI model contains a 5th level. This is designed to measure return on investment. This level uses cost-benefit analysis to determine the value of training programs. It helps companies measure whether the money they invested in the training has produced measurable returns. And if so, what are they? So, what are those returns that training has been able to provide? Or could it be like they try to filter out other factors which has helped increase in performance? Now, the important question that might be coming into your mind is how do they calculate the return on investment? So yes, the Phillips model also gives a 7-step process for calculating the return on investment. First thing that is important here is to understand why calculating ROI is important. Or should we not stop at the fourth level? Should we not be happy with whatever evaluation we did up to the fourth level? So the slide in front of you shows that yes, there are some factors, and these are only illustrative. There could be many more factors for which we should do an ROI. So what we gain by doing an ROI, we try to justify the training budget to show that our training is producing results for the organization. It is able to, like if we are able to assess how much performance has increased due to training, if there were no training, how much performance was, and due to training, leaving out the other factors, how performance has increased. So to justify the training budget, that is maintain or increase training, that is in rupees, like we want trainings to keep on happening, especially it is very important for the institutes who conduct the training so that they get proposals, so they get more people and their business keeps on running to get more and more people and more trainings in the future. Then to determine the effectiveness of training. We talked about effective training. What do we mean by effective training is we have a standard. Like the organization sets a standard for a particular skill or knowledge or a particular behavior that my employees should be able to perform at this standard. So if the training is able to give them that standard, then it is an effective training. Ideally, it should be 100% achievement of the standard. But even if the training is able to give them 80, 90, 70%, 75%, then they would be increasing performance from the current level. So to determine the effectiveness of the training, it is important if we do the ROI calculation. And then to evaluate the training method used and the use of time for trainer and employee. Because time away from work, time spent by the trainer, these all cost money, and whether they are effectively used or not, and training methods, whether these are obsolete methods which are more time consuming, whether they are giving us more result, whether they are more beneficial, that is what we try to evaluate to determine if there was a change in time, cost, or behavior of the employee. Hmm? To provide evidence to management and stakeholders. Stakeholders are all the people, including the public, people who have a stake in the money that has been spent on the training. So, to provide evidence to management that yes, training has increased the performance, and if, of course, the stakeholders, to build trust and respect for ourselves and the trainers, for the institute, for the organization. Like in such and such organization, people are given sales training, which is the best training. Then it is the organization earns some respect, earns some trust also. To gain credibility with executives, to identify areas for improvement, because your supervisor asks for the information, so it becomes one important thing. Everywhere in the world, the whole organizations run like that only, that your supervisors or people superior to you, They may be asking you whether the training has fetched you any benefits or not. So if you're calculating the ROI, you are able to tell them that yes, our training has been able to show improvement in performance. Because of the training, there has been improvement in the performance. And of course, to keep our jobs and to help staff keep their jobs. It is, yes, difficult. It may lead to some of the facts. It may reveal some facts which may not be palatable, which may not be good, which may not be very, like, people may not be very happy with those facts, but it is a way to improve ourselves. And if we are able to justify the training costs, then we can keep our jobs and help staff to keep their jobs also. There is so much paraphernalia attached, photocopier, logistics, so many things. Now, how can we calculate the ROI? I said that there were 7-stage processes. In brief, these are the steps. Step 1 is collect pre-programmed data on performance and various skill levels, different skill levels. What are the performance and how much skill they have. That is before starting the program. You will notice that it is much more scientifically designed, that the planning and the obtaining of information begins even before the program starts. So that at the end we have something to compare with. So first step is to collect pre-programmed data on performance or skill levels. Then step 2 is to collect the post-programmed data on performance and or skill levels. So both these things are required by you. Then the third step is, now this will be a little difficult step. Isolate the effects of training from other positive and negative performance influencers. How do we do that? We will have a look at it a little later. But this is a very important step, isolating the effects of training from other positive and negative performance influencers. Could it be, for example, in our earlier example, could it be the poor performance was because there was a snag in the machines and not because of the defect in the training? Or it could be due to the increased performance, maybe due to some incentive or motivation that the organization giving it. So suppose it starts a policy that those people who have undergone the training and are producing this many number of products, they will be given an incentive. So that could be a motivator and the performance increases. It could be either way. I'm just giving you an example. Step 4 is then to convert the data, whatever data you obtained in first step, second step, and third step. Try to convert the data into a monetary value. So isolating the effects of training and from other positive and negative performance influences, this data is to be converted into monetary value. That is, how much actual value is the change worth to the training program. There would be very varied costs. For example, the faculty, the time of the participants away from the training, logistics, food, and training material, cost of the training institute, etc. So calculate those costs also of delivering the training program. Then the step 6 is to calculate the return on investment. That is, what are the actual program benefits in terms of rupees, or that is divided by program costs. So we calculate the ROI by a ratio, that is program benefits over the program costs. So this calculation is to be done. And then we have the last step is identify and list the intangible benefits. Okay, you are calculating all the above things, but there would be some intangible benefits. Intangible means which you cannot touch or see. You can only feel, like, for example, increase in the performance of the organization, or increase in the sales, reduction in customer complaints, etc., which are not tangible. You see, the morale of the employees has increased. It could be that also. So then we can calculate the BCR, that is the benefit cost ratio. This is a basic definition of return on investment, benefit cost ratio. This is a quantification of the relation between the benefits of a program and its costs. So whenever we are doing ROI, we are talking about numbers, okay, percentages, numbers, etc. So this is a quantification of the relation between the benefits of a program and its costs. So it is a ratio, and benefit cost ratio is equal to benefits upon costs. When benefit cost ratio is greater than 1, naturally that means that the benefits are more than the costs. So when BCR is greater than 1, the benefits outweigh the costs and the program is considered a success. When BCR is less than 1, then the costs exceed the benefits and indicate that improvements or changes probably need to be made to justify the continuation of the program. So we have to rethink about that. When BCR is less than 1 and costs are more, then we need to improve. We need to make some changes so that whether the and we maybe we will have to take a harsh decision to decide whether the program So how do we calculate the return on investment? That is actually a percentage of benefit over cost ratio. So the formula is like this. It is simpler. ROI percentage is equal to, ROI is always talked about in percentage, and it is benefit minus cost over cost. So that ratio of net benefit minus cost upon cost into 100. That is the return on investment. A result which is greater than 100% means that the program has a net benefit after accounting for the costs involved in running it. For instance, an ROI percentage of 150%, it will mean that the program yielded a 150% return on money invested. That is, the program yielded $1.50 for every dollar that the program cost. A result less than 100% means the program had a net cost. This training, or maybe we will improve this training so that the percentage increases. The steps that have been given by Jack J. Phillips have been summarized in the slide like this. The first is collecting pre-program data. Then the second step is collecting post-program data. Then the third step is isolating the effects of the program. Fourth is converting data to monetary value. Then fifth is tabulating the program costs. You should tabulate them and see, and only after that you calculate the return on investment. So, and then ROI, calculating the ROI, that is net program benefits over program costs. Net program benefits would be benefits minus cost upon program costs into 100. And then we have the seventh step as the identifying intangible benefits. What are the intangible benefits related to the improvement? Let us look at one example. I don't say that this is the ideal example, but we have something to understand how it is calculated. This has been done in one organization. The program was project management and business analysis and learning programs. This was a program of ESI on which they did ROI. Now, what they did was first they collect the pre and post program data. So they took a survey because there were large number of people. So they did a survey and they took a survey approach to ROI, and that can be effective and efficient. So good survey methodology was taken, and it was the key that they said. When surveying opinions, the more data points, the better. So it's important to gather much more data, and you can have multiple questions on the same issue, so that you can eliminate things that are not proper. So for return on investment to be credible, providing as many different perspectives as possible to validate the data is essential. So you can take it through different perspectives also. If possible, include the student's manager or colleagues in the evaluation process to enhance the credibility of the ROI number. So it's a good thing if you are able to engage the manager and colleagues also. They can also give you some data, including them. Then you build the survey. Three prerequisite measures are critical lead-ins to showing ROI. First is the learning effectiveness. That is the prerequisite. And then job impact. So you must complete first these things: learning effectiveness, job impact, and business results. They provide quantitative proof to support the final conclusion. So ESI people did that. And then learning effectiveness, they use the Likert scale, which I discussed in the last meeting and last class. Questions will typically ask the students to what extent they experienced gains in knowledge and skills as a result of the course. And on a Likert scale, and present it along with quality measures in top box format. Top box analysis, which groups responses that agree or strongly agree, works well for quality and effectiveness measures because it is conservative and tends to show deviations that might get lost through simple averaging. So they did not do a simple averaging. They had a Likert scale in which they had gradation in, say, for example, if a question is asked, I strongly agree, I agree, I somewhat agree, or I don't know, then disagree, somewhat disagree, disagree, and totally disagree, or something, strongly disagree, something like that. So, Likert scale on results of a top box analysis was performed by ESI. And ESI International, they did a survey of 30,000 students who took project management training, and they were then tabulated, and what they showed was the following. You will look at it in the following slide and show the following quality and effectiveness of training. For the quality, they got percentage of learners selecting top box. And very satisfied people were 80%, very satisfied with instructor performance 80%, very satisfied with content and delivery 76%, training effectiveness and experience, significant knowledge and skill gain 79. So this kind of measures they did. Then job impact measures. They are students' ability about their ability to apply learning on the job and to what extent the training has improved their work effectiveness. So this seeks to understand how quickly students are able to apply new knowledge and skills, and to what extent the training contributed to increased job performance and productivity. Job impact is best measured in a post-event survey 30 to 90 days after the class. So they did it after 30 to 90 days in that period, not from the course evaluation. Like you should not see the questionnaire or the tests or exams that were done. What you do is job impact, if you want to measure that, that has to be done 30 to 90 days after the course. So they took following measures in ESI survey and demonstrate the following measures are from the ESI survey and demonstrate how job impact measures are typically measured. So this is what the job survey revealed, job impact survey revealed. They took it 60 days after the class. 70% of the learners responded positively when asked whether they were able to successfully apply the knowledge and skills they learned to their jobs. That means that 30% did not respond that way. They responded to the contrary. 80% said that they had used the knowledge and skills they learned within 6 weeks, and an additional 18% reported that they plan to use it in the near future. 60 days after the training, 66% of the learners reported that the training had contributed to a significant improvement in their job performance. On average, learners reported a 9% improvement directly tied to the training investment. This value is critical as it is directly resulting from training. So, 9% they indicated on an average, learners reported a 9% improvement. So they did the business results, they measured the business results. Quantitative evidence must be provided to show specifically where and by how much they improved. So they asked questions related to specific desired outcomes and by measuring the extent to which the training impacted each. Now we have a table that would be shown to you in the next slide. And this is the data from ESI Project Manager Survey and demonstrates how business results might be quantified. So on the left side, you have the business results, and then you have the percentage of learners reporting an impact on the business results, and then the average training contribution for all learners. So that is in a percentage. So increased quality, 63% learners reported an impact on the business results, and 13.49 they calculated that that is the average training contribution. Decreased cost 22 and so on. Decreased risk, decreased cycle time, increased effective communication, increased productivity, increased customer satisfaction, increased employee engagement. These are the parameters of business results that they were important for ESI. So what they did after getting all this data is to create a post-event feedback loop. Data for learning effectiveness measures, which are critical measures, should be captured in a post-course survey delivered 30 to 90 days after the course was delivered. Actually, 90 days is not sacrosanct, but generally, like the maximum application and learning or the growth happens in that. The delegate's manager also should be surveyed to corroborate the findings. Of course, all the three surveys, the course evaluation immediately after the class, the post-course student survey, and the post-course manager survey should be structured so that it is easy to reveal. Then they determined a cost basis investment, calculated training related costs. such as per student loaded tuition costs, including courseware, instructor fee, instructor travel and lodging costs, venue costs, snacks, administrative costs, food, etc. The average salary of the attendees, because they were being paid salary when they were away on the training itself. So that was also calculated. So these are some of the indicators that give you the cost of the training. Then they did the calculation. The most important number in determining ROI for a learning program is the training's direct contribution to performance improvement. So in the ESI study, the learners reported a 9% improvement in productivity that you saw earlier, specifically due to the training they attended. However, when self-assessing, people tend to be overly optimistic. This is a fact. This is a psychological fact. For this reason, the performance improvement percentage should be factored down by 35% to compensate for the bias. Actually, when we are happy with some program or something, then we generally tend to say a little higher about it, praise a little higher of that. So that is why it is factored down by 35%. This factor is based on a data set of 500 million student scores conducted by knowledge advisors. So they did a survey and then they found out that this is 35% is the factor that should be given. And the original 9% improvement reported in the ESI study was factored down to 5.82%. So actually they thought that it would be 5.82% to compensate for self-reporting bias. And likewise, if the manager survey responses do not correlate with the student responses, additional factoring may be required to bring the two closer together. So that has to be done. Now, the benefit from training or return is calculated by multiplying the percent performance increase by the average student's salary. Now, you must be thinking, why salary? What does it have to do with it? Actually, on average, organizations benefit from their employees, okay? And when they benefit, they pay you salary. In other words, they derive more value from them than they cost. If you paid 50,000, then the benefit to the organization from your efforts and your work would be 70,000 or 75,000 and not 50,000. Therefore, it can be calculated that if an individual's productivity increases by 5.82%, as was in the study, in ESI study, then the company would benefit more than 5.82%. Using salary as a basis for calculating investment return is actually conservative, as the real return would theoretically be higher. However, that could be one basis for calculating your ROI. And return is equal to $80,000. Suppose this is the return, average salary is this, into 5.82 performance increase. That means return is $4,656, sorry, 4656. Investment is equal to $1,600. Now you have calculated that cost. So the ROI will be 4,656 minus 1,600 divided by 1,600 is equal to 191% per student monetary benefit. This number shows only the return side of the ROI calculation. In this case, the training generated $4,656 in monetary benefit for each student taking the course. Though technically ROI is a single calculation, there are a few additional ROI related calculations that can be performed to help communicate the impact more effectively. For instance, the ESI study calculated the return on investment, but then they also calculated monetary benefit per learner, then also calculated benefit to cost ratio, BCR, and average payback period. That is the period which will be required for paying back the investment that has happened on every learner. So benefit to cost ratio, they calculated. This ratio actually articulates the monetary value of the training relative to the cost. For the ESI study, the companies and government agencies investing in project management and business analysis training received $2.91 for every dollar they invested in training. The benefit to cost ratio is 2.91 to 1. So that is the ratio 2.91 to 1. The payback period. This is a time-based ROI calculation which indicates how long in months it will take to pay back the initial investment that was done in the training. To calculate the payback period, divide the period of student monetary benefit by 12. That is by months, 12 months, to get the monthly benefit. Like you are calculating it for the whole year and then dividing it by 12. Then divide the investment by the monthly benefit to get the payback period. So if we had $4,656 as the annual benefit, if you divide it by 12, that is months, you get $388 per month benefit. And $1,600 investment was there, divided by $388. So that will give you 4.12 to pay back the investment. So that is how it will be done. So this was the ROI model. Although I'm not stopping my presentation here, let's have a small break here of 5-7 minutes. Then we will continue. Okay. So I'm just stopping to share and I'm just pausing my video for some time and I'll be back in say 5-7 minutes. Then we will continue the class. We will go ahead with the Kaufman model now. I've also relaxed for say 5 minutes and shall we continue with the session? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So I'm sharing my screen again with you. So friends, there's something that is called Kaufman's model of learning evaluation. Actually, don't get confused in different models because that is just an approach. An evaluator's work is to evaluate the trainee before, during, or after the training, or at the job performance level, depending upon the place you are, or depending upon the requirement of the organization. And the different models are actually approaches how you can do it. You can select the model based upon your liking, based upon the convenience, based upon your client's liking. That is actually more important, what they like. So you can choose the model of your choice. But by far, Kirkpatrick's model is the most popular model. So let us move on. Now let us have an overview of the Kaufman's model. This was made by actually Roger Kaufman and John M. Keller, and they published a book, or you can say documents, that are called Levels of Evaluation Beyond Kirkpatrick, and that was in 1994. And the document was in Human Resource Development Quarterly. Kaufman's model has also become popular, and Kaufman's 5 levels of evaluation is a response or reaction to Kirkpatrick's model. And what it tries is it wants to improve the various ways in which the Kirkpatrick model is used. So, so that was actually a response or reaction. So when he published this document, it was a like a kind of reaction to the Kirkpatrick's model. Kaufman's model mirrors the 4 levels of Kirkpatrick model. It has 4 models again, and he divides the Kirkpatrick's level 1 into 2 sections. The reaction, if you remember, Kirkpatrick's level 1 was reaction level, where we obtained the feedback or the response of the participant to the training course. What he did was he divided it into 2 sections, input and process. Then Kaufman's 5th level evaluates results for both the customer and the society in general. So that is what he wants to achieve. And Kaufman's model is positioned as more practical than Kirkpatrick by some authors. Now, it is again a perception. Many people would think that Kirkpatrick's model is much more practical. At least we are able to achieve some kind of evaluation. And some people might think that the Kaufman's model is more practical. Now, what are the 5 levels of Kaufman's model? Let us have a look at them. The level 1, he has divided, if you remember, I said he has divided the reaction level into 2 parts. One part is input. This covers the training materials, such as digital resources that are used to support the training or coaching. For example, the trainer shows a film or a movie in the training course. Then in input, we try to evaluate the resources that are being used. It could be the hotel venue also. It could be the PowerPoint presentations or the reading material, etc. So it could be anything for training or coaching. Then level B is 1B is process, input and process. The second part of the first level measures process acceptability and efficiency. In other words, the actual delivery of the learning experience. So for level 1A, input assessment, what you will do, you will create your questionnaires or surveys to get the feedback of the participants on the resources. For example, how was the reading material? Did it help you? Was it easy to understand? Was it too low to from your level, or was it too high, and so on? Or how was the movie? Whatever he used, or what was the delivery method and all that. That is for level 1A, input level. And for level 1B, you actually evaluate the process. The second part of the first level measures process acceptability and efficiency. In other words, the actual delivery of the learning experience. Did the trainer deliver the lecture in a way which you understood? How was your experience? Was the reading material good enough? Like process, actually the learning process, and not the inputs, not the materials, but the delivery, actual delivery. Did you understand anything from the movie? Or so questions based on that. Level 2 is the acquisition. Kirkpatrick called it learning, but here he calls it acquisition. Kaufman's second level studies the payoffs for both individuals and small groups. This is actually a micro level thing. The micro level client would usually be the learner. So you would be studying whether they acquired the learning and whether they used it on the job. So the evaluation will be for whether the learning was acquired or not, and whether it was applied on the job. Level 3 is the application. He calls it application. And the third level evaluates how well participants utilize what they learned in their on-job performance. So this is more or less similar to the behavior level of Kirkpatrick, but here we try to assess whether the participants are utilizing what they learned in their on-job performance. Level 4 is organizational payoff. So that is like the result level of Kirkpatrick. Kaufman's fourth level measures payoffs for the organization as a whole. That is the macro level client. So if you notice, in level 1, it is the micro level, that the individual level, even in level 2. That is the learner and the trainer. And here at level 4, it is the organization, the macro level. And it would be typically the business or the organization undertaking the evaluation. This level includes performance improvement evaluation. So here you measure through observation, interviews, etc., or maybe questionnaires, and plus a cost benefit or cost consequence analysis. So in organizational payoffs, he has tried to include both the cost benefit analysis and also measuring the improvement in job performance. Now the level 5. Okay, everything evaluated was good and all that. He extends this model to the society, that is the mega level clients. After all, the corporate is also responsible for the society, and the government, in most of its deliverables, it is doing a service to the society. So Kaufman's fifth level is focused on what he termed as mega level clients, that is the customer base. This could refer to a business clientele and or to a society as a whole. So that is how the Kaufman's model is uh, made. Architecture is like this: level 1A input, level 1B process, level 2 acquisition, level 3 application, level 4 organizational payoffs, and level 5 is societal outcomes. Now let us have a look at the differences. Differences between the Kirkpatrick model and Kaufman's work. Kaufman divided Kirkpatrick's level 1 into input and process. He grouped Kirkpatrick's level 2 and 3 as micro levels. And he added a fifth level that evaluates results for both the customer and the society. So in none of the earlier models, this was there. The models we discussed, customer and society were not included, but he has given an extension and how the organization is giving to society. If there are lesser customer complaints, then the society is benefiting. How the society is benefiting by the organization's improvement. Now, what are the changes? The first change that he does is division of Kirkpatrick level 1 into input and process. He separates the evaluation of resource quality and availability from evaluation of its delivery. So delivery evaluation is another part, and he has tried to segregate it, separate it from the evaluation of resource quality and availability. So here logistics may be included, here materials may be included, and it is important to assess the quality of resources, whether they are outsourced or within the workplace. An otherwise well-run course could fall down due to low quality or insufficient resources. For example, the course material could be wrong level for the learners, and or perfectly robust materials could be poorly delivered. In the process part, you can assess whether the materials were very good, but delivery was not good enough or poorly delivered. So by separating resources from delivery, Kaufman's model makes it far easier to see which factor was responsible for the success or failure of a course. It could be that the trainer was very good, his delivery was very good, but the material was not good enough, which did not convey the message correctly. The second change is grouping Kirkpatrick's level 2 and 3 as micro levels. So using Kirkpatrick's model, a level 2 assessment would measure the learning that took place on a course, while a level 3 assessment records whether the learning had an impact on the participants on the job performance. So he's making a very clear line. And here, this approach provides useful data that will help resolve any issues. Hmm? By grouping these as micro levels, Kaufman's model places less emphasis on the reasons why learning isn't making its way to the workplace. Now you could say that that may not be very helpful because we need to know this, and this is less helpful as there are different reasons why course participants may or may not obtain new skills and knowledge from a course compared with the extent to which they apply what they learned on the job. So it could be the other way also. Change 3 is what he did was adding a fifth level that evaluates results for both the customer and society. Societal consequences and customer benefits are evaluated. This is in contrast to Kirkpatrick's level of evaluation, which only looks at the benefits to the business itself. The Kirkpatrick's model is concerned only for the client organization or the organization who is sending its employees to training. But here, he is trying to accommodate the customer benefit also. And it includes obtaining robust data at this level, and definitely it will be very difficult. It will be expensive also, very expensive for most organizations to conduct a data survey, but people do. Some good organizations, for example, if you see the companies for ROs, etc., they do take data from customers and then they try to relate it to organizational training. This would most likely result in the collection of lower quality anecdotal evidence with questionable results. This is just an opinion of critics. Okay. It is not very like this is not my opinion or anything, but people do think like that. So collection is very difficult. And if you collect it, it could be just a reaction or some anecdotal evidence. Like if you are an Amazon customer, if you see the reviews before buying a product, you see many people's reactions also. So that could be questioned also, and it is less practical. But he has tried to uh, extend the levels, extend the process, extend the scope of evaluation so that it is more beneficial. He has tried it, or maybe in the days to come, we will have a better model than this. So these are the things that I wanted to share with you today, the Kaufman's model, etc. And these are the models that are in your course. And let's have a look at, since we have some more time, let's have a look at something else too. I will just share my screen a little later. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions, you can ask me. Okay. So you have something called mean, median, mode, that is in statistical calculations, also in your curriculum. So let us have a look at what these terms mean. And I will just share one PowerPoint with you. So you have these three things: mean, median, and mode. People do confuse between one another, and but it pays to know the difference between them and how to use them. So what is a mean? Mean means something having a position, quality, or condition. Mind here, we are talking about the data. When we are talking about the data, these terms are related to data. So the data that you have, in them, something which is having a position, quality, or condition midway between extremes, a medium, that is a mean. A number that typifies a set of numbers, such as a geometric mean or an arithmetic mean. It could be that. The average value of a set of numbers, that could also be a mean. That is midway. It is easy to calculate. What you do is you add up all the numbers and then divide by the number of items there. Divide by how many numbers there are. So what you do is actually it is the sum divided by the count. You add up the sum of the things and then divide it by count. Example is, what is the mean of these numbers? 6, 11, 7. So how you will calculate? You will add 6, 11, and 7. That gives you 24. And then you divide by how many numbers? There are 3 numbers, that are 6, 11, and 7. 6, 11, and 7, you add them up, and there are 3 numbers, so divide by 3, that is 8. So the mean is 8. This is very simple and very common. Let's look at these numbers. We have 3, 7, 5, 13, 20, 23, 39, 23, 40, 23, 14, 12, 56, 23, 29. Now the sum of all this is 330. But how many numbers are there? There are 15 numbers. So the mean is equal to 330 by 15. So that is 22. But 22 is not figuring in this list. There's no 22 here. But it's okay. The mean is 22. Although we do not have 22 as a number here. Let's have a look at another example. Find the mean of these numbers. There is 3, minus 7, 5, 13, minus 2. So if you have studied arithmetic, you will end up by negative values are subtracted from the positive values. So you have here 3 plus 5, 18 plus 13, 31 minus 9. So you will get 12 here. 3 plus 5 is 8. 8 plus 13 is 21. Sorry, not 31. 21 minus 9. So you get 12. So there are 5 numbers here. And the mean is equal to 12 divided by 5, that is 2.4. So the mean of the above numbers is 2.4. Now let us look at the other term, that is the median. Median means middle value of a sorted list. So mind you here, if you are taking out the mean, you don't need to sort the list. But if you want to take out the median, first you have to arrange it and sort it out. So to find the median, place the numbers in value orders and find the middle. For example, if you have these numbers 12, 3, and 5, you arrange them in an order. For example, in this, we have arranged it in 3, 5, 12. This is the order from smallest to 12. That is the ascending order. Now the middle is 5. So the median is 5. Although 5 is very far away from 12, but it is much closer to 3. but it is the middle value, so we take this value. The number has to be there in the list. There's another example: 3, 13, 7, 5, 21, 23, 39, 23, 40, 23, 14, 12, 56, 23, 29. So our first step is to sort it out, and we put these numbers in the order. So we have, in an ascending order, we have 3, 5, 7, 12, 13, 14, 21, 23, 23, 23, 23, because 23 is appearing 4 times. Then 29, 39, 40, and 56. So this is our order. Now there are 15 numbers, and our middle number is the 8th number, isn't it? Because we have an odd number, so naturally the 7 here and 7 on the other side. So we have the 8th number as the middle number, and the 8th number is 23, isn't it? So from here, the 8th number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 is the 23. And from here also 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is the 8th number. So 23 is our median. It doesn't matter that some numbers are the same in the list. Still, you will have the 23 as the median. Now, what will we do if we have an even number, even amount of numbers? Then the things are slightly different. In that case, if you have a even amount of numbers, the count is even, then in that case, we find the middle pair of numbers and then find the value that is halfway between them. This is easily done by adding them together and by dividing by 2. So you have this list here. Now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14 numbers. So we put them in order again. So you have this 3, 5, 7, 12, 13, 14, 21, 23, 23, 23, 23, 29, 40, 56. Now there are 14 numbers, and so we don't have a middle one. So we have a pair of middle numbers. And in this example, the middle numbers are 21 and 23, isn't it? To find the value halfway between them, add them together, 21 plus 23, and you get 44, divide 44 by 2. So 22 is your median. But mind you, 22 is not figuring in the list. 22 is not there figuring in the list, but still it is the median. So for even numbers, you will have to do like that. So 22 is not in the list, but that is okay because half the numbers in the list are less and half the numbers are greater than 22. So 22 is the median here. Now we come to the last term, that is the mode or model value. The mode is simply the number which appears most often, like it has more count. In 63966,593, the mode is 6 because 6 is repeated 3 times, as it occurs most often. To find the mode or the model value, it is best to put the numbers in order and then count how many of each number. A number that appears most often is the mode. Let's have a look at an example. We have here 3, 7, 5, 13, 20, 23, 39, 23, 40, 23, 14, 12, 56, 23, 29. In order, these numbers are like this. And now you can see that 23 is being repeated 4 times, the maximum times it is being repeated. This makes us easy to see which number appears most often, and the mode is 23. Another example, look at this: 19, 8, 29, 35, 19, 28, 15. Now we put it in order, in ascending order: 8, 15, 19, 19, 28, 29, 35. Now 19 appears twice. All the rest appear only once. So 19 is the mode. It is quite possible that no number is appearing more than once, then it's difficult. The main disadvantage of using the mean to describe a group of numbers is that extremely small and large values can skew the result. Like what we are doing here in this slide is we are comparing mean with median. So for example, the mean of the numbers 4, 5, 5, 6 and 40 is the sum of the numbers divided by 5. So you get 12 if you do that. 4 plus 5 plus 5 plus 6 plus 40 gives you 60. And if you divide it by 5, you get 12. And that is a value that doesn't really reflect the majority of values in the group. 6 is again much smaller than 12. And 40 is much far away from 12. So it is not reflecting the majority of values in the group. Here we have very small values, 4, 5, 5. So this is because the number 40 is skewing the mean. It is so big that the mean is changing, like it's tilted or whatever you say. Now we compare this to the median, which is the middle number in the group. Here we have median and we arrange it in the order. So which is the middle number? 5. And in this case, it gives a closer representation of the data. You have 41 odd number, but 5 is much more closer to 4, 5, 5 and 6, isn't it? So it's a closer representation of most of the numbers in the group. So median gives you more. It again depends upon the data. It's not necessary that median will give you that. So now we must have an appropriate measure. So each measure may not apply to any situation. If you wish to find the average grade on a test, for example, for your class, but one student fell asleep and scored a 0, that mean would show a much because of one low grade, while the median would show how the middle group of students scored. Using these measures in everyday life involves not only understanding the differences between them, but also which one is appropriate for a given situation. So mostly what we do is we use all the three and try to interpret the data in different ways. So use mean, median, and mode reveal different aspects of your data. Anyone will give you a general idea, but may mislead you. Having all the three will give you a more complete picture. For example, for the data 576 and 127, you get a mean of 36.25, which is much far away from anything. And it is a number that fits the arithmetic but seems a little out of place. No number is near it. The median 6.5 may have more relevance to the series. Here median will be 6.5 because the middle numbers are 2, 7 and 6. So what we do is we add them and divide it by 2. So you have 576, 127 and the median is 6.5. But says nothing about the outlier. This is the outlier here and it is so big. Since the series has no repeated numbers, it has no mode. This also reveals valuable information about your data. So that is what we have. Let us have a look at an example. The Bureau of Labor Statistics defines the median wage as the 50th percentile wage estimate. 50% of workers earn less than the median and 50% of workers earn more than the median. It is the center of a range of numbers, though not necessarily equally distant from the top and bottom numbers. It is one way statistics define the center of a set of data using a number. Other measures used for this are known as the mean and the mode. So you can use them also. Another example is a median salary shows exactly what a person precisely in the middle of all the workers in an occupation would earn because it isn't affected by outliers. A value in a set of data so different from other numbers that its existence can't be expected based on chance. That is an outlier. So, in the middle of all the workers in an occupation would earn It is shown precisely because it isn't affected by the outliers. So that is what is the beauty of median is. And in the same way that the mean or average can be. For example, in a group of 5 workers who earn $100, 100,000, 10,000, 100,000 and 1 lakh. Oh, this is 10 lakhs. The mean or average salary of these workers would be $220, 220, while the median salary would be $10,000. In such an extreme case, the median is a much better indicator of a typical middle range salary than the mean. So mean doesn't take you anywhere in this example, but median will give more indication. So that is how we do it. And I end my presentation here. And thank you very much for listening to me. And if you have any questions, we can have them, or maybe for the next time. Next Sunday, I'm likely to have the class at 10 and not at 12. And even for the next 18th, on 11th and 18th, I'm likely to take the class on 10 a.m. So thank you, Dhananjay. And I think it was an information load today because everybody is silent. And let's look at the chat. I didn't look at the chat in between. And, okay, thank you everyone. And thank you for listening to me. So we meet the next Sunday. And I'm just closing my presentation here.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. Closing down the session.